Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Hey there, welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, where we're expanding the natural family planning conversation. I'm your host, Ellen Holloway. All right, we are here with Kerrigan Gardner. Kerrigan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and chat with you.
Yeah, awesome. I'm really excited to talk about our topic today. This actually came from Kerrigan posted on Instagram this just like powerhouse post about how cycle syncing is just a way of embracing our femininity. And I saw this post and I messaged her. I was like, you have to come on the podcast and you have to talk about these things. And she's like, okay. So that's Kerrigan.
Aw, well, thank you.
So before we jump into that topic and talk a little bit more about that, would you introduce yourself to our listeners, Kerrigan?
Yes. So my name is Kerrigan Gardner. I'm 26. I live in Ohio with my husband, Evan. We have a dog, but no children yet. We've been married 2.5 years. And yes, I do have an Instagram account, which is where we connected. It's called Catholic Girl Wellness. So it's where I do my best to invite faith into fitness and nutrition. And more specifically, in the last year or so, I have become so fascinated with reproductive health and specifically cycle syncing. So I feel like it's kind of all I talk about nowadays. But I really do think it's such a health tool that God gave us. So that's a little bit about me.
It's so true. And this post, I'll link this post in the show notes. I think I can specifically link an Instagram post. Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
I'll at least link her profile in the show notes. But it just it really did show how we really can just easily work together with our bodies. So before we jump in a little bit, I want to quickly define cycle syncing. The term started as a fitness term when I first heard about it. And when I first heard about it, I was kind of like overwhelmed. I thought that was like sort of too much and kind of ridiculous. And the term, again, it started in the fitness world and it was for elite athletes who needed to like Olympic level elite athletes who needed to train, female, obviously, cycle syncing. And so they synced up their workouts with where they were at in their cycle, more or less, in order to maximize their efficiency in training, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the term started. And I remember when I first heard about it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. I don't want to put that much effort into like my workout plan. That's just crazy. But the term and also my understanding of it has morphed over just the past few years. I mean, just maybe like the past 2 or 1 year kind of. And thankfully, it's kind of morphed into more of this lifestyle movement, which I love. I love the concept of it being really about your entire life in a holistic way. So, Kerrigan, how would you then define cycle syncing?
Yeah. Well, first, I totally agree with you because I heard it years ago and I was like, well, that's not attainable.
Yeah, right?
Because, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Stacy Sims, but she was one of the pioneers and she works with high-level athletes. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to Planet Fitness and I'm just going to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
But yes, I totally agree with you because cycle syncing has become more mainstream, more people are talking about it and really inviting it into every area of our lives. So it seems more attainable and it has been certainly in my life. So for your question, I really like to start with like thinking about it in terms of creation, because the very first step to cycle syncing is understanding how God made the female body. And so once we can learn his like feminine design, and realize, oh, there's 4 phases: menstrual, follicular, ovulatory, and luteal. And then with all those come different hormonal fluctuations. And I certainly should say, I mean, from my little intro, you should know this. I'm not in the medical field and I'm not a fertility awareness educator. But, from this knowledge, I think it's so attainable for every woman to recognize the 4 phases in their cycle. And then, I mean, there's so many resources out there, like working with an instructor, they can help you learn, all right, you're going to start out and your hormones are going to be in the gutter. And then, as you move into the 4 phases, estrogen increases, later progesterone increases, and it really does. It makes you feel different. It makes you just have different energy. Your metabolism changes. Your habits can change. And
Right.
so once you learn how God made the body and apply it to yourself, then you can play around with those lifestyle adaptations, or try some things here and test it out. And I think over time now it kind of comes second nature to me, which I never thought would happen, because I always thought wow, that does seem pretty exhausting.
Right. Well, and it's, I think when you look at it prior to actually kind of practicing, molding your lifestyle around your cycle, you look at it and you're like, wow, that seems like so much work. That seems exhausting to try to sync up what I'm doing and, how much I'm working out and how much effort I'm putting toward work, or, whatever, how many meetings I'm having, during these different phases. That seems exhausting. But actually, when you kind of start implementing it, it's very second nature, because our cycle is part of our nature. And so it's actually quite, well, not speaking from experience, because I'm postpartum right now, so I'm not cycling, but it can become quite second nature, and quite easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. So, let's get a little bit more specific now. What are some ways that cycle syncing is a superpower that really allows us to embrace our feminine genius?
Yes, I love this question, because it really is a superpower. And I think a lot of times when this gets brought up in terms of fertility awareness conversations, it can almost seem like, oh, women are these super women and we have these powers and men are just different. But I think it's important to recognize that we're complementary. And so, yes, women, we cycle. It's typically about a month. People say 28 days. I don't think I've ever had a 28-day cycle.
Right.
But men, well, not but, I don't want to put them down. They're just different. And so they cycle every day. But it's so complementary, because we need both. We need both in relationships, but also the world. And so I could go into a little tangent, but anyways, the superpower that I see first and foremost, it really is life-giving. And even if, God doesn't call us to be, or doesn't call all women to be biological mothers, we are called to be mothers in other ways. So spiritually is huge. Mothers play such a big role in society. And so when, we embrace our womanhood, we can understand that, okay, I can bring life into every area of my life. And the way that fluctuates all cycle long, I think it's so beautiful, because if we lean into it, in our reproductive years, especially when we are cycling, we start out needing to rest, and then we get more energy, and then we are we can do anything at all for a few days and go. And then, post ovulation, post peak, we tend to slow down, be more detail oriented, more of a homebody. And so I really do believe the world needs us in our slow times, in our energetic times, in our times where we just want to be home with our family. because all together that really helps, take care of ourselves, take care of our families. We can honor God through all of that. Like, I think our society needs us at all those different points and needs to see women show up in all those different ways. And I just think it's so beautiful how, certainly we have like the same personality. And so we're not like becoming a different person like
Right,
every
right.
week. But when we lean into those shifts, I think we can better show up for others and, better utilize our God-given gifts.
Right. Well, and how beautiful that God like told us, "Hey, woman, you need to rest on a regular basis."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I do.
Amen. Yeah. And I think
Amen
it's
to
so
that.
important for men and like children to see that because that is so important. Like God was like, hey, I'm gonna knock you down and you don't really have a choice. Um, so I think it's so beautiful that it's kind of forced in there. We're like nudged into it and really encouraged to not see it as an inconvenience, but okay, this is here for a reason. How am I going to approach it?
Yeah, exactly. I think all of us, we can find a way to like rest a little bit more during that time when our body is saying, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
I need rest." Maybe that's asking your spouse for a foot massage, or if you're single,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
that's going on a walk instead of doing your hard workout, or getting yourself to bed
exactly.
early, or like, I don't know, I love like having a foot bath or like having a regular bath, either way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I
Those
think
kind of things.
what's so awesome about cycle syncing is it's so predictable. So you can plan those things in.
Right.
Like you mentioned going to bed early. That was me last night. I knew. So I'll just share, I'm day one of my menstrual phase right now. So my hormones are like the lowest they're going to be
Mm-hmm.
all cycle long. And so I knew that when I scheduled this podcast and I didn't want to, but I was like, oh gosh, I can only do this day and life circumstances. So I just chose a date. And I knew it probably wouldn't be optimal to have a conversation because in like your ovulatory phase, words come so much more naturally and you're more bubbly and outgoing. So that would have been prime time to have this conversation, but it just wasn't doable. So I knew I was going to be, day one of my cycle. So I went to bed early last night, took it slow this morning, had my prayer time, ate breakfast, like no rushing, and then, hopped on and hope for the best.
That's such a great example. I'm so
Oh,
glad that
thanks.
you shared that because, yeah, I think sometimes in these kind of conversations that I hear about cycle syncing, it's like, oh, yeah, schedule all your meetings for your ovulatory time. It's like, for most people, that's not really practical.
No,
We can't just take a week off of like scheduling meetings. But
right.
what is practical is what you just said, realizing, okay, I'm going to be at a little bit lower energy than typical.
Mm-hmm.
Or not typical, like I'm going to be at a lower energy than my, ovulatory phase or my
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
follicular phase. And I'm going to recognize that. And I'm going to do what I need to do in order to have the energy I need for this meeting. And so in your case, that was going to bed early, taking it slow this morning, making sure that you took your prayer time. I mean, that's huge. So yeah,
Yeah.
great example. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Oh, well, thank
So,
you.
I think we can just like transition perfectly into our third question here is what are some ways that, or I mean, tell us about embracing cycle syncing, and maybe give some other examples of how it has kind of changed your day to day for the better.
Yeah. So, like I just said, it's so predictable. And even like with irregular cycles, I can get into that a little bit later, but I always know what's coming up. And like, so does my husband, because we talk about it all
Yeah.
the time. And I think it's so important for people, especially like your spouse or fiance, boyfriend, if you're in a relationship, to know like where you're at right now and like what's coming next so you can support yourself, so they can support you. Because before I knew about cycle syncing and like really started implementing it about a year ago, I always thought things were so random. I was like, man, I'm just like
Yes.
tired today. Like, I guess I'll just drink more coffee and that will fix it. Or these random bursts of
Side note,
energy
that's going
would
to make it
come.
worse.
I know, I know. Now I'm like, why did I do that my entire life?
Yeah.
Holy smokes. Yep, team decaf over here. But yeah, for example, I crave running like sprints like a few days a month, and I always thought it was random. Like,
Oh my
this
gosh.
is really strange.
I can really relate to that. Like I honestly, I'm like thinking back to when I cycled last, which was like over a year ago.
Yeah.
I'm like postpartum and had pregnancy and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I seriously, I like craved like going for a run, and I always thought is kind of random.
Right.
But yeah.
Right. I was like, wow, I guess I just haven't done it in a while. Like, my body's ready to go on a run again. I'm like, oh, no. I mean, good guess, but that's not correct. But so I find, and this is like universally true, doing cardio is amazing, like in your follicular and ovulatory phases, as your body is like ramping up, estrogen is increasing, you're ready to ovulate, you have more natural energy, and like your body just wants to use it. And so I love now connecting all these dots, and I always know, like, all right, yep, I'm in my follicular phase. Won't be surprised if I want to run tomorrow, because I usually do. And so it helps with exercise, but also like every area of my life. A lot of people are into cycle syncing their nutrition. I don't do that too much, but I do know that the metabolism changes throughout the cycle. So like in the luteal phase, after you ovulate, your metabolism is higher. And so you're typically hungry, craving some chocolate. Like, lean into it. Like, that's a great source of magnesium. So go for it. But yeah, so like eating more snacks in the luteal phase. Like, I don't know, would it be helpful to like go through the 4 phases, or are you liking these just random tidbits of what I do?
I kind of think we're fine being random. I think a lot of times on the podcast, we do talk about these 4 phases, and, and if someone's confused, I can link a couple of episodes where we talk about these things, specifically. Great. So, if you're kind of like, wait, I don't even know what the 4 cycles or, what the 4 phases are, go ahead and jump into the show notes, and I'll link a couple of episodes that kind of talk through them in different ways. I know there's a nutrition one that specifically talks about nutrition throughout your cycle.
Oh, great.
So that's a great listen.
Yeah.
So I love your examples. And I was just thinking, when you were saying that, like, your luteal phase is not going to be a good time to like start a diet or start an exercise regime or something like that. Like, keep those things in mind. Like, if you're trying to like start a new habit, okay, I want to get up early and pray for 15 minutes every day before my kids wake up. Like, it might be easier to wait until you're in your follicular phase to go ahead and start that routine, because you're going to have the most energy to do it. And then if you can start in your follicular phase, by the time you get to your luteal phase, you've already been doing it for almost 2 weeks.
So true.
And so, and at that point, like, it's becoming more a part of your life. Right. So that's like my big thing lately is like, okay, if you're trying to start a habit, don't start it when you're on your period. Don't start it right at the end of your cycle. Like, start it kind of mid-cycle, and then you're going to probably have the best luck with really like keeping that up.
Exactly. No, I love that you bring that up, because a lot of times before we learn this information, or we just view our cycles as either, okay, I'm fertile or I'm not, women tend to blame themselves, and they're like, well, this just doesn't work for me. Like, I was doing great, and then my cravings kicked in. Like, well, yeah, that's to be expected. That makes sense. So lean into it. Be learn to expect that, and then you won't be so caught off guard, and you're not a failure. Like, this all makes sense because it's how God made us. And so I think that so often we're not equipped with this information. And so women think they should just keep on doing the same things every day. Like men can do great, but we need to adapt. We don't really thrive on doing the same like workouts, nutrition, date nights, social gatherings. Like we don't thrive when we keep those the same every single day for a month straight. And so give yourself grace, but also like this is your invitation to learn your cycle, know how, your shifting hormones affect you personally, and just like take note of how you feel, what are your habits, and I think you'll be amazed when you can start making those connections.
Yes, I love what you said about sometimes we just think of our cycle, especially when we're tracking and trying to avoid or trying to conceive. Like when we're really, really in one of those camps, we often think of our cycle as I'm fertile or I'm not. And
Right.
those are like the only two, types of phases that we have. But
Yeah.
that is not the case of our cycles. We have these 4 phases. We have menstruation, we have the follicular phase, we have the ovulatory phase, we have the luteal phase. And they each affect us differently because there are different hormones that are present or not present during those specific times. And so, like, when we put ourselves into this box of like, I'm fertile or I'm not, we're missing out on an opportunity to really embrace our femininity and an opportunity to really make our lives better and easier if we're like going along with that cycle. Because again, like that failure feeling is so common in us women. And I think it's probably because we're cycling and we start a habit and we're really good at it for a couple of weeks. And then all of a sudden, our body is saying we need to take a break. And then our brain is saying, I have failed at this. And you need to switch that mindset. If you have that fixed mindset around things like this, you need to change that into a growth mindset. And you need to say, okay, my plan to get up 15 minutes early and pray every day it's a really good plan. And ideally, I'd like to do it every day. But my body is telling me that I need that extra 10 minutes in my in bed. And so I'm only going to get up 5 minutes early this morning. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a really fast prayer, right? I'm still going to have that prayer time, but I'm not going to have the full, 15 minutes that I had. I'm going to have 5 minutes of that prayer time, and modify it as needed, but don't feel like a failure and don't put yourself in that fixed mindset of I have failed. That's not the case. You have not failed.
You have not. You're feminine.
Exactly.
Because I really do think like that's the alternative. Like you are not a failure. You are female.
You are
and
female.
You have to give yourself grace because this all makes sense. It's a part of the feminine design, and yeah.
I want a shirt that says that. I want a shirt that says, I am not a failure. I am female.
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's so true. It's so true.
All right.
I just think, oh God. Sorry.
I was going to jump into the next question. Do you want to add anything else?
No, let's do it.
All right. So before we close out, I want to talk about irregular cycles, and let's discuss a little bit about how can you cycle sync if you have irregular cycles?
Yeah, because it is very difficult. So full transparency, when I really started diving into this past summer, so right now we're recording in February, so many, many months ago, I was in a pretty rough spot with my hormones, just with my overall health. And I didn't know it, but tracking helped me realize it. So I'm so thankful for that. So there was a 6-month period of time where I ovulated once, and I'm not on any sort of contraception. Totally just, things should be normal and cycling over here. So that was very alarming. And with the knowledge that I have about my cycle and like how my hormones should have been fluctuating, the tools I have for tracking, I knew what was supposed to be happening. And so when my chart was just like a straight line, like my PBT was doing nothing, I took a step back and realized, okay, like you can't cycle sync when you're not cycling. And so you can't lean into, this is me talking to myself, like you can't lean into your femininity and the way that God intended for me to fluctuate when I'm not healthy, like something's wrong. And so it really took me, and then I brought in an instructor because I was terribly doing it on my own. And so we're now in a really great place, which I'm so, so thankful for. And it really is because I learned in, the past year or so with the help from a professional, like what the female body needs. It needs a lot more gentleness and rest and a lot of food. And I can't be static every single day. I can't be intense every single day. I need to learn what supports my hormonal fluctuations, my feminine body, because it has to show up. But if we ever want to have a child, I need to be cycling. So I bring that all up because women in their reproductive years, like, you should be having those shifts. You should be ovulating. It is so, so, so healthy. So if anyone listening is at a place right now where you have irregular cycles, maybe you're like me and you had or have anovulatory cycles, take a step back, give yourself grace, be patient with yourself, prioritize rest, seek out medical professionals. So specifically, I started working with a Creighton practitioner, and she's also a NAPRO, or natural reproductive nurse practitioner. And she was an amazing resource. And after working with her these past few months, she's like, hey, you are good. You are fertile. In Creighton, there's a certain thing called a mucus score. And she's like, you have a perfect mucus score. I'm like, oh, sweet. I'm so glad. But that's after really, adapting my lifestyle in support of my cycle. So, oh gosh, I'm getting long-winded, but I would say that, cycling, it's so worth it. I know a lot of times women may look at my story and say, oh, wow, that's nice. Like, you didn't have to worry about, all this confusion and, the changes happening within the body. But I just want to tell you, cycling is so much better. It's so healthy. We need to be cycling to, be fully healthy. So, do your best. Typically, you can always know where you're at when you're menstruating in your menstrual phase. Then you get to the follicular phase, and that's where I kind of just lived in the follicular phase until the bleed came. And it did get really, really confusing because I was just like, all right, this phase never ends. Do I just act like I'm in it all the time? And so that's where I was really intuitive. I always am, even now that, I am cycling as I should be, but just wake up every day, evaluate, how do I feel? What actually sounds good for movement? Do I want to take a nap today? And so I think it's important to invite that intuition in, because that's also a part of the feminine design is we are very, very intuitive. So hopefully that helps, provide a little support.
I want to repeat something that you said, repeating it for the people in the back. It is so important to cycle. That is very, very healthy for us. But I think, you really hit the nail right on the head when you said, some people following you, when you were in that phase of not cycling for 6 months, they were like, oh, that's so great. Oh, that's wonderful. You didn't have to deal with your period. And it's no, that was actually probably one of your most unhealthy periods of time that you've had in the past year. And now you are so healthy cycling right now. And, and, trying to encourage your cycle health through the ways that you live your life. And that is just so important. I don't think we can say that enough, that it's healthy to cycle. We want our cycle to be healthy. We don't want to avoid cycling. Cycling is so good for us in so many ways.
Yeah. And regardless of if you're in a relationship or not, like I learned, I was listening to some other podcasts, and it was a Creighton practitioner talking about how she helps like religious sisters learn their cycles.
Fabulous.
Because it's important for everyone, regardless if you're trying to conceive or not. Like this is, I keep saying, but like this is the feminine design, so it is meant for all females. So
yes,
it's meant for everyone in their reproductive years.
Love it. Love it. All right. We just have a few minutes before we close out. So I know we've talked about this a little bit, but what are a couple of quick, easy ways for someone to start kind of integrating this into their life?
Yeah. So I would say you have to track first and foremost. I think, you could try to say, I think I'm in this phase based on how I'm feeling. But you don't want to guess. It's, there's great instructors out there, great resources out there who can help you definitively know, and that will make this whole process so much smoother. So once you know what phase you're in as you're transitioning into the next, I would really start out with, I think, exercise and like your social life may be good areas to start, because your like energy and motivation, it really does fluctuate all cycle long. And there's certain times where like pushing yourself and going after PRs is really great. And other times where, all right, in the luteal phase, post-peak or post-ovulation, depending on what terminology you use, cortisol is high, and that's our stress hormone. And so you really want to be careful about like high intensity, like, sorry to, talk about a whole group of people, but people who do those like Orange Theory month-long challenges, I'm like, I don't know if I would recommend that to my best friend, but, see how you feel. Because I think it's important that like, caffeine and pre-workout aside, like your body's going to tell you how it wants to move. And same with social settings, like it's totally okay to rest and say no if you need to, but also know that we are made for community. So I think you'll find like in the follicular and ovulatory phases, like you want to get dressed up, like put some real clothes on, get out of those PJs, go see your friends, family, plan a lot. And then the cycle is really beautiful because at the end, you get to transition back into the sweats and stay home more. And there's a place for all of it. So those are my two, I would say the two areas of life that are easy to kind of start with.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's a great place to start, because those are things that we really do have the most control over, what kind of exercise we do or how much we exercise. And we do have the more control over, say, our social calendar than our work calendar. We can't, not all of us can modify our work calendar around our cycle.
I cannot, not very well.
Exactly. Some people can, some people are, self-employed and they can schedule meetings when appropriate and things like that. But I feel like the majority of us, not so much. But we can affect, how much we exercise, when we exercise, what we're doing. And we can say yes and no to social engagements. And we can decide those kinds of things. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like we can say no to social engagements, but you can. You can say no. Here's your permission, this podcast.
Yes. Or just suggest another time. Like if like, that day is rough, just suggest another time. And I'm sure, people are flexible. So
exactly.
You can make it work for you.
Well, Kerrigan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your experience and talking about cycle syncing. I loved having you here.
Well, thank you for having me. This is so fun.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not following Charting Toward Intimacy on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. I always love hearing from you guys. So if you have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please feel free to reach out either on Instagram or send me an email. Links to those are in the show notes. If you would like to reach out to Kerrigan or follow her on Instagram, links to follow her are going to be in the show notes as well. Until next time.